Wherapy. Therapy wherever, whenever.
So, until now, in Coffee with a Therapist, I've talked a lot about different types of anxieties, depressions, and mental health issues based on your age and how to treat them and the like. And in this week's episode, I thought we'd change it up a little bit. So, in this week's episode, I'm going to give you some practical advice on how to get deeper and more meaningful conversations with your loved ones. And the advice I'm giving you is from my practical experience as a psychotherapist and also from my education. So these are pieces of advice from the therapist's chair on how to get more deep and meaningful conversations. So stay tuned. My first piece of advice about how to get deep and meaningful conversations with your loved ones is to avoid, at almost all costs, to use the question why. If you think about it, asking somebody the question why is like asking them to go to the very end of a psychological process, to skip parts of the journey, to take a shortcut. And this naturally leads to low quality answers. The person might not have really reflected on the reason why properly. So if you're talking to a loved one and they might say, me and so have never really gotten along, instead of asking them, well, why is that? Ask them, when did you first realize that you and so did not get along? This forces them to explore their past and explore their memories. And there they'll give you a piece of information, a date, and what happened at that point. And those pieces of information are things that you can build your conversation on, and you can ask more questions. And again, don't use the question why, use when, what made you realize, how. Try to find different creative ways of asking questions about these things, and you'll find that your loved one will expand in a deeper and more qualitative way, and that will lead the answer to finding them rather than them taking a shortcut through a psychological process to finding their own version of the answer, if that makes sense. Yeah? The goal of asking, or the goal of avoiding asking them why and asking them other questions instead, is to force them to continue on this journey through their psychological process and to pick up on details that they would have otherwise skipped. So give that a go. Try not asking them the question why and ask them other questions instead. My second piece of advice for deeper and more meaningful conversations with loved ones is a piece of advice that I use a lot in my therapy sessions with my clients. And I've heard it's also a bit of a negotiation tactic, and that is to repeat the last three words that the other person said. So if the other person said something, and I was hurt by that, pause for a bit and say, you were hurt by that? So in that case, obviously, I just realized that's more than 3 words, but just repeat the last 3 words. And that, like with my previous piece of advice, it kind of encourages them to expand and explain the psychological process behind what they had just said. So you're showing your curiosity. You're showing also that you don't really understand what they are saying, because you can never truly understand what somebody else is saying. Yeah. So by just repeating the last 3 words or 4 words, usually don't do too many. Yeah. Stick to 3 or 4, something like that. Then and just leaving it hanging after that. Yeah. If there's some silence, just be in the silence. Then you're going to really encourage them to explain themselves, because everybody wants to be understood. That's an innate part of human nature, and we want to form a connection with somebody through being understood and understanding the other person. So just by using these 3 words, it encourages conversation, it encourages explanation from the other person. So give that a go. And my third and final bit of advice is to enjoy the silences. Yeah. A lot of the time people can kind of feel like the silences in a conversation are quite awkward and hard to deal with. And if there's a silence at the beginning of a conversation, then I can understand that. But if you're speaking, if the other person is speaking and monologuing a little bit and on their way to something profound, then don't disturb them. Don't ask a question. There were so many times when I started as a therapist where I asked a question too early. Because when you ask a question, you're interrupting a psychological process, and you're interrupting the emotional state that they're in. Thought processes and emotional states are dynamic. That's the main concept of psychodynamic therapy. They're always in constant motion. So if you ask a question too early in the silence, then you're probably interrupting a psychological process and sending them in another direction, into a different emotional state. So just hang in there for a little bit longer than you expected to, than you feel comfortable with. Be the one to maintain the silence, to ensure that the other person is maintaining their journey. Don't interrupt them. Because at the end of that silence, as they are thinking their answer through, they might come with something really profound. In most cases, they do. So again, sending them in the other direction is a shame. So that's my third bit of advice. Maintain the silence. Be comfortable with the silence. Hold it for a little bit longer so you don't interrupt a psychological process. Thank you for listening to this very short podcast on different ways to make your conversations with loved ones more deeper and more meaningful. At the end, as I promised, since we've reached the end of this podcast, I'm going to introduce to you the 3 countries in next week's Therapy World Tour, and those are let me see, I'm looking at my map over here. Panama, Myanmar, and Portugal. So if you're from one of those 3 countries, either get in touch via Instagram or go over to wherapy.com and find my email address and email me. And if you're one of the first few people, then you will probably get a chance to have 1 free therapy session with me. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast, and I hope you have a great day.